And to me, as an action figure, AA, something I would call love or grace, demonstrates through AA to me, you know? It just works that way, a lot. It was funny how many, you know, the amount of coincidence that seemed to start to happen when I got sober. Maybe I just was missing them, but there's so many coincidences where, to me, I just believe it's something that sees more than your little stream of Paul, you know, sees a much larger, broader view. And if you can get weaned off of believing the thought system, and then follow a different GPS, so to speak, you know, you want to call it spirit, higher power, Holy Spirit, whatever. Course in Miracles would be Holy Spirit, AA is higher power. It's us, yeah, but us not as you, yeah, but it's us. We're not accessing anything else other here than us, really. We're all there is, in a sense, appearing as many seemingly, but it's just a dream, isn't it? Yeah, nothing ever really happened. So AA was really good in explaining the effects of the problem. Yeah, and I identify completely with it because I had lived under that tyranny. And thank God over the years things happened and I saw the root of the problem as other. Yeah, I didn't see self as an ego that I had. All I saw self was an activity of claiming. Yeah. And in that claiming, constant claiming, there's something that's implied or insinuated that there must be someone there who's doing all the claiming. Yeah? So it claimed the thought system, and so the feeling when I was aware or conscious, that I wasn't conscious, or where there was consciousness of thoughts, there was a feeling that would get produced that I was the thinker, yeah? That they were my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. And therefore I had a very thick terminal uniqueness. And so I was not able to be teachable because I didn't believe anyone had gone through what I had gone through. No one thought like I did, no one felt like I did. So I was not teachable. And I wasn't learning from my own experience, and I wasn't learning from other people's experience. So I was just basically relying on an unreliable situation which demanded not only relief, but immediate relief. And drugs and alcohol will make you feel different. I'm not saying they'll make you feel better, but you will change how the action figure feels. And at that point, that was good enough in a way. Yeah? I just wanted to change how I felt, like constantly. And so I turned into, as the action figure, a great description I heard when I was earlier in AA. It says, the alcoholic of my type, and I'm not talking about what I am, I'm talking about the who, you know, this action figure, the story. The alcoholic story of my type is willing to pay any consequence tomorrow not to feel uncomfortable now. And the imperative, the drive is I'm uncomfortable in my own skin. Yeah? So I want to fucking get out of it. And the quickest things I found, better than TV and anything else, was drinking and using. And the drinking became an auxiliary, and I just got more and more into a quicker solution, to the point I was shooting coke into my neck so that it would get to my brain and my heart faster than through the arm. I mean, that 1/100th of a second was way too much to wait. Yeah? I swear to God, it was insane. So I had ample evidence as this that I was not managerial quality, that this is what's going to happen. And it's amazing, like I shared at an AA meeting today, and your understanding of the steps is after they've worked on you. Yeah? That's how you get an understanding of them. You've submitted yourself to the program of recovery, and you get changed as this. You're not changing a damn freaking thing. I used to change it all the time, and look at where it went. So when we're talking about, well, you're going to have to change, and you know, I had a it says you're going to have a personality shift. I was shifting the personality every second, shoot and go. That's all I wanted to do, is shift the personality. But it's not that, it's what directs the shifting. Yes? And in AA, we're introduced to a much clearer, much broader modality of mind that's not based on self. And so that shift fucking works, where in AA, if you stay in recovery, you're going to have a new attitude and outlook on life. That's not an experience. Yeah? Experience aren't going to produce a new attitude and outlook on life. Something has produced a new attitude and outlook, and that's much more influential here than an experience I have. Yeah, is the attitude and the outlook. And then it would say you're going to have a new freedom and a new happiness. So you're going to enter into a whole nother modality, and you haven't thought it was available because of the self's obsession, that tunnel vision. And even if you entertained it, the self would be claiming to be the one that's going to end up there. That's why it never fucking works. And AA has one of the greatest statements of all spirituality, the most cryptic of them all: self can't get out of self. And it's echoed in actually some of the highest levels of old Zen, where Huang Po, a great Zen master from China, would say you can't use the Buddha to seek the Buddha. It's exactly the same thing we're saying in AA. You can't use self to get out of self. So how are you going to get out of self if you're identified as a self? Yeah. How is that which you're identified with, that which is playing God, how is that which is playing God going to quit playing God? It's trying to quit playing God would be playing God. Yeah? How are you going to get out of that? You can't get out of it if there's the fact, which isn't true, that you're in it. You cannot fucking get out of an imaginary place. That's the bondage of self. The bondage of self isn't bondage to something. See, if he described it, he could have said the bondage to self, which would mean I'm in a place and I'm bound to it, like a fucking cage or something. And I gotta get fucking free from that cage, and when I'm free from it, I'll be free from the bondage to that cage. But it doesn't say bondage to self, because there isn't a self. There isn't a thing called self. It's a mental idea, yeah? So you're weighed down by that mental idea when you're in the process of being identified as it. So you're actually bonded of self, yeah? And even when we're seeking freedom, we're bonded of self. You see, it's so beautiful if you recognize the diagnosis. If you were bonded to self, it would be easily to leave. You would see self as something, and then you walk away, and you keep your eye on the rearview mirror and make sure self was still back there, and you would just drive away and be free of self, to self, right? You'd be free of it. But it's an activity. The bondage doesn't happen. It seems to happen. Yeah. It appears to you to be true. So the bondage appears to us when we, not the activity, but when we're in a certain condition. If we're in the condition of believing in the act of being identified as a self, which is the mental state's whole fucking stream, if we're in that, yes, we are now bonded to this idea of self. Seemingly, it appears to what we are to be so. And what we are is reality, honey. Honeys, not you. Let's look at the honeys. What we are is reality. How could it not be? How can you not recognize the evidence that we're reality just by the basic, everyone agrees here, this is a subjective experience. That should give you an indication that it's not a real fucking place. Because we override it all day. Doesn't that make you feel, doesn't that tweak your little curiosity that this is a subjective experience? Like, we swear there's a real world, but we override the real world. The real world would be Hawaii is a paradise, but a lot of people go to Hawaii and they're in fucking mental hell because they're thinking while they're in Hawaii. about New Jersey. You know what I mean? So we override everything. Doesn't that indicate, hey, you know, you're like, let's say you're like sort of tranced out from Die Hard 12 and fucking thousands of channels, nothing on. But suddenly you get this little bit of information, you tweak up a little. Wait a minute, this is a subjective experience, so I give everything all the meaning it has? Yes. Wow. That goes contrary to my story of being a victim and being oppressed and they're fucking with me. It's a totally different take, isn't it? So, if that which is giving all the meaning it has gives a false delusion the meaning of being real, it's going to seem to be real to us, yes? So, it can take a mirage, and because it believes it, even though it knows there isn't water because it's gone to the mirage, but you'll keep seeing the mirage because you're believing it, yeah? Not that there's a mirage, but you're believing of it. There's no need for a mirage. You're going to act like there's a mirage, yeah? Which most people are doing all day. They're having fear based on something that's not happening, but they're acting as if it's fucking happening. A lot. Have you ever seen it when it gets to such a point that people lose all restraints? They're just talking to themselves out loud, walking around describing what they think is happening, and it's not happening. Everyone's looking around. What's going on? But in them, it's happening. We're reality. We're it. Not as this. This is not. But as what's giving meaning to this. Yeah. We have that statement in AA, I love it. The fear acronym, false evidence appears real. It describes everything. If you just saw that, all right, false evidence appears real. To who? I mean, there's got to be some observing of it. It's got to be appearing real to who? Or to what? It's not like false evidence appears real. In what world does that happen? Here, because it's not a real world. False evidence appears real. How can it appear real unless it appears real to us? Yeah, we must be reality. How could false evidence ever appear real? It's never known reality. It has no realness in it whatsoever. How could it mimic reality? It doesn't. It just presents itself to us, and because we're seeing it in a weird way, where by being identified as a thing, we give meaning to it, and we give meaning to it that a world of things is real, and this real world can affect me as a thing. And therefore, and there's time in this real world, and shit, I got fucked up in the past, and I'm afraid I'm going to get fucked up by people in the future. And actually, in this real world I'm in, the past and the future is much more important than now. I can't even relax now because I got Thursday coming up. It's rushing up like in my rearview mirror. Thursday. And it's not just I think Thursday as a beautiful, open, empty canvas. I see the fucking picture already. Shit's gonna happen to me. And if you believe it, it's sufficient enough to override what's happening now. How could that possibly be unless you were incredibly freaking powerful? How could you override the experience of consciousness, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, by thoughts about a day that's not happening? It implies there's something going on. There's a huge power at play here. And it's us. They say it in physics beautifully. The greatest influence of every experiment is the experiment. Or the observation is distorted by the observed is distorted by the observation. There you go. In my experience, you're an observed, and my observation is distorting you. I see you as I see you. And the same way, you're the observation, and you're distorting this observed. You're making this to seem to be an incredibly clear, perfect person, aren't you? maybe, close. So the observation distorts the observed. So is the observed real enough to override the observation? I mean, I saw it in the hospital, but let's use a better one. Let's say there's young kids and they've gotten sexually abused, yeah? And maybe the same event by the same person, but they would all, after years have happening, would see it differently. Some may have become alcoholics, and other people got super strong and they went into service to help other people. So basically, the person overrides the most heinous event. They have the ability to override it. They can outshine it, the circumstances and situations. Not because Paul is heroic, but there's a possibility because you do outshine circumstances and situations. It's not a heroic, Herculean event. It's a fact. We're just not accessing it. And even if the possibility arises, how we're going to access it will neuter it. Because you'll try to access it as what you're not. You'll live life from self. And that's going to defeat you. You can entertain all the greatest concepts of spirituality, but when you shoot yourself into that mix, it's going to fucking turn out bad. You're going to be practicing for 40 years, and you'll have to end up one day saying, hey, nothing really ever happened. Exactly. Because you were there. This whole point is about the inherent absence of what you're taking to be the presence in your life. That's all it is. It's a simple correction that was never needed. Because it never needed to be corrected, because it's never fucking really changed. And I bet you, if anyone has an awakening, if you want to call it, they would have to admit that when it seemed to download right at this special now, which it isn't a special now, it would have been a download, and it would have been, it's always been this way. It would erase all the history, all the future history, all the real things you thought you were fucking up the ass of. It would erase it in no time at all. It would go, this has always been this way. It's always been this fucking way. Now the mental state may come up again and override that, and then it will neuter the whole event and call it an epiphany, let's say. And now you'll become an epiphany hacker. And then you'll go to meetings where everyone shares their epiphanies. Just like we go to some meetings, everyone shares their war stories. You go to spiritual meetings, they're all sharing their fucking epiphany stories. Or their awakening stories. But I notice, I swear, anytime there was an epiphany seemingly, it usually ended with this. I'm having an epiphany. That's when it stopped. As soon as I showed up and claimed the epiphany was fucking over. And then you take it like a big game hunter that never killed any fucking lion. You got the lion heads and the deer and the goat and everything, but they were already dead by the time you got there. So this is all about seeing what you're not. Because that's the one quality we all have that cannot be adulterated. It cannot be tainted, it cannot be robbed, it cannot be diminished, it cannot be added onto, it's not going to show up in time, it's timeless, it has nothing to do with all this fucking shenanigans we're up to. Yet it's never it allows all this to happen, and yet it's never touched by any of it. Yeah? That scene is prior to all the other fucking circus shows. And so you can see what you're not, yeah? And in seeing what you're not, that's what you are. You are the awareness that allows a seeing of what you're not, yeah? Now we want to become aware as what we're not, and then try to see what we're not, yeah? So that we can have the event of seeing what we're not. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. You cannot be present for the presence. Yeah? When you arrive there, you become the presence, and then suddenly the presence seems absent. And there's no way It cannot happen. Those two things can't be at the same time. So no matter, it's sort of like being on a seesaw, yeah? So there's the seesaw and you're down here. And so you go, I'd really like to get up there, that high end. Once you get up there, it's down there. And then you go, and you never realize you're the cause of it all. It's like the hamster bitching about the hamster wheel. What fucking days? But I'd really like to get off of this hamster wheel. But it's a hamster wheel because it's a hamster. Right? So I'm telling you, it's such a clear, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, because I've been trying to share this for 20 fucking, I don't know how many years. I don't see how there could be any debate and argument with this statement. And Bill W. did not write that book. He transcribed it. It was a downloads, yeah? And the downloads, we're not basing it on Bill W.'s words. It's there for a lot of other meanings to come out of it, yes? Why would you want to have the one flavor of Bill W. when that download is like open source material that when your mind goes on it, you're going to blow it up into something else? As it says in the recovery book, hey, we know but a little. People that come after it will now expand on these ideas. Exactly. So here, page 64, I'm going to tattoo this on my arm. Yeah, I am. I've said it so many fucking times. But it sounds as clear can be. It's like, I feel like if people heard it the way I feel it, I would be able to go around the world and it'd just be one diagnosis. You'd see the doctor one time. I wouldn't even have to check on you. I'd just give you this diagnosis and toodaloo. And I'd have faith that you were going to be fucking okay at the end of time. All right, 64. Being convinced. Now, being convinced doesn't mean I was convinced or I'm hoping to be convinced. It's an activity. You're in it, yeah? Present tense. I'm being convinced right now. Because the knowledge is always live. Yeah? The knowledge is always live. The solution is always available at all times. Now, always now. Yeah? So being convinced that self, this is so beautiful. Because let's say it presented it another way. The book would have been about 3,400 pages. Because it would have said, being convinced that Steve, Mary, Joe, Jim, Mary, say every fucking name of every alcoholic. God, forever. It would be like the Vietnam War. Mary, no. Being convinced that Paul, Mary, no. Being convinced that self, a fucking foreign fucking idea that's been introduced to this, and this system is not a closed system. It's being moved, things are moving through it constantly. There is no border. You are not behind the cheekbone. You know what I mean? You don't have one door and only one door. It's like you're open constantly. Shit's happening. So self manifested. So manifested means it appears, yes. So we have the definition. So let's follow it. Self. So I'm going to put my definition of what I believe self is from old Buddhism, which is self is the sense of being a long-lasting, independent, separate entity, a thing, right? An individual thing, which would imply whatever happening in it would be individual, like my thoughts, my feelings, this and that. Yes, that's the assumption. So being convinced, an activity, I'm fucked. See, that's what, when I got struck sober, something downloaded and it said, I'm fucked. And that fucked has reverberated ever since. I am being fucked right now. For 30 years. Without any lubricants. 30 years. No drinking or using. Being convinced that self manifested. We're going to go over every word. In various ways. In other words, in multitudinous, many, yes, different sizes, different lengths, yes, time and space and like that. So being convinced that self manifests in various, we haven't even been mentioned yet, have we? We haven't even been talked about yet. Being convinced that self, just let's say this fucking GPS, right? A GPS, so that your little fucking thing's open, GPS goes on. And as soon as you get the implant, it's like you never got an implant. You call it you. Yeah? All right, so being convinced that self manifested in various ways. Everyone's clear, yeah? Being convinced that, okay, various ways has defeated us. Oh, wait a minute. So here's the side where Steve, Mary, Michelle, Paul, Amelia, whatever. We're all on the us side. None of us has entered the self side. He's built a very, like a separating wall. Self, us. Self defeated us in various ways. Wait a minute. So, all right, we'll get to that. So self manifests in various ways. What has defeated us? And it goes, okay, all right, if we're all clear about that, we are now going to look at its. We're not going to look at Paul, Mary, Jim's, no. It's the foreign installment, common manifestations. Yeah? So we're not going to look at them all. It was way too much, too daunting. But we're going to pick some of the, let's say, the more cruder ones or the more shared ones. Yeah? All right? So then it goes to the next paragraph. So let's just sit there for a second. And it says resentment. Yeah, resentment, the biggest thing, the biggest killer of alcoholics, resentment. Holding on to something that never actually happened, the way you think it happened. Yeah, so resentment, all right? Okay, so now you're supposed to enter this process of writing stuff down, resentments, fears, harm to others, in pursuit of what you want, you know, looking at sex, because there's a lot of energy around that. Okay? All right, so now, then when someone talks about this situation, they will say, all right, my resentment, my fears, my harms I've done to other people, right? So there's suddenly the expressions of a foreign installment moving through what we call us. Suddenly, in that process, there's a forgetting that it's a foreign installment, and there's a claiming that it's ours, somehow ours, you know? So its expression or manifestation is now seen to be my manifestation. Now, I don't know how else you could put it, but I would say that is someone in the act of being identified as self, because they're claiming self's manifestations for their own. I mean, I rest my fucking case. I mean, it's so clear for me. I mean, I'm just fucking it's as clear as like the most pristine ding, China. It just would ring for fucking ever. Yeah, it's a perfect diagnosis. So how does the foreign installments expression somehow get to be claimed and called ours? Because that is the petri dish of the defeat, obviously. Yeah. I would say it's us, let's call it us, falling for a mental process that is constantly implying, insinuating, presupposing, remembering the act of being identified as a self. So we are confronted by a very, very active verb by the mental process, which is, it's all in the act of being identified as a self. So the memory, you rely on memory quite a lot, and memory pictures you as a body. You're pictured as a body when you go into the memory vaults, yeah? When you rely on the thought system, the thoughts picture you as a body, yes? So the fact is, there's something going on, because it would be so incredible if you could see that which seems to be defeating you as something other than you, because if you could, a new possibility would be introduced, which is I could be free from it. I used to use the weird story with the guy had a tumor on his side. Yeah, the old one I used to try now, a big freaking tumor. And so he just assumed he couldn't get this removed or anything. He just thought it was part of him. So then he had to get his shirts and jackets tailored so it makes sense room for this tumor. And he'd be on strange websites looking for women with tumors on the other side so they could rub tumors. It's fucking crazy. And his whole life is sort of built around this fucking tumor because he hasn't entertained the idea it could be removed. He just hasn't entertained it. It hasn't come across. It hasn't come across the screen. Suddenly someone comes and says, bro, you know, that fucking thing isn't you. You can get it removed and you will continue. What? Yeah. So you would think immediately that person would go for the fucking solution. Who wants a fucking heavy tumor? You know, using that as like an armrest, but who wants a tumor sticking out? But now he looks in his closet, he's got all these fancy shirts that are tailored to live with that tumor. He's got those fucking fine Italian leather jackets. I'm not gonna waste that $800. I'm gonna fucking keep the tumor. And I like the girl with the tumor. We get along fine. So you would think, see, the solution doesn't seem like a solution to him. Well, guess what? We're identified as the foreign installment, so when we actually hear the description that we're not that, we don't rush to this fucking solution. Because there's a lot of fucking investment on the mental side for your story. A lot of people have a story that they're wrong, and you know what? They want to be right about being how wrong they are. So they're fucking gonna be wrong quite a lot. Yeah? You see? So the solution is right here, available, but if there isn't like a stampede, which always surprised me, not now, but when I first started to share this, I would think, fucking hallelujah, this is a gospel, good news. But by the reactions of the people, it didn't seem like it was that. And then of course I thought, well, it's the messenger, it's me, you know, maybe I should clean myself up a little, whatever. But in fact, people just don't, they want to be free. They don't want to be free because it would cost them. And if you're sighted on that side, the way you're going to look at the solution is from the self's point of view, and it already thinks it has a solution, which is let's keep it the way it is because I'm having a whole lot of fun fucking destroying this person. Yeah? And he's not letting you die that quickly. The parasite's going to ride you for as long as it can. I see the same people I saw in the 29 years ago, and they're still surviving. They drink every fucking day, live on the street. Nothing can kill them. The fucking a nuclear explosion, they probably come out of the ashes. They're like cockroaches because the parasite ain't letting them go. Look at what happened to poor Wendy. 8 fucking years the thing feasted on her. 8 fucking years. The thing wouldn't let her go. I mean, she went through hell upon hell. I cannot believe how many rings of hell she must have endured. So yes, there is a solution. And the solution, as like we say in recovery, has nothing to do with the problem. It doesn't. The problem is an activity that the solution is entertaining, really. The solution is giving it all the meaning it has, yeah? Thoughts cannot drive you crazy, but your thoughts can. If you heard the thoughts in your head, but they were held as Stanley's, you would have immunity to them. But because you hold them as yours, they can destroy your day. It's not the thoughts. The thoughts are being used. The feelings are being used, actions are being used to imply, to insinuate, to reinforce, through obsession with it, the bondage of self. And it can never become so, it just seems to be so. Yeah. Like Ramana says, you know, the day this dawns on you, you'll laugh about all the other shit. And you know what? That day you're gonna laugh like crazy is now. It's the exact same time, same moment. Yeah? You can't find timelessness in time. No way. It's a vertical insertion that you miss when you have a horizontal view. So what I love to say in AA, the higher power is always available at all times, right where you are, with no requirement necessary to meet it because you are it. And it's not because you worked really hard to become it. You have always been it. Yeah? You've been being it all the time. You've been being it, entertaining that itself is not it. But it cannot produce any kind of change. Being is being. Business is business. Yeah? There's a solution. The solution tells you there's no problem. That's what it does. It's an activity, the solution's entertaining. If the solution loses interest in it, the effect of it will diminish greatly. Because it doesn't produce its own effect. It's the cause of all causes that produces its effect, by believing it's a body. Yeah? Yeah, so. It's incredible. I've said that statement, I said thousands of times, and every time it has the same ring as the first time it dawned on me. When I finally saw that which was implying me, that I took to imply me, to insinuate that was my representative life, when I saw it as not me, the possibility of being free from it showed up immediately. And finally, the horse was before the cart, fucking things made sense. And over time, it's become the last answer. It's such a damn good answer, it negates all need for any other answer. I mean, if you want a demonstration, you are the demonstration. Oh, I turned it on tonight. That's a big win for me. Yeah. You want any questions?
So, can you be a little more specific around the solution? Yes.
Well, you can't be specific about the solution. You can be specific about the problem, and that's the solution.
About which I'm not.
See what you're not. You can study what you're not. You can learn about what you're not, with the hopes that you'll realize it's not you. And then you'll be what you are, and when you finally seem to be what you are, it will reveal you've always been this way. Yes, that nothing ever fucking happened. Literally. And then the dream continues, the dreaming. But now you travel lighter over the years. Yeah. Then for me, it turned into inclusivity. My head was very black and white. And then things became more inclusive. And then all the little mental partitions and perforated lines all started to fade out. And then you see just a sort of a living splash of color on a canvas that's like a movie screen. So the movie screen, it doesn't move with it because it's infinitely, but this whole thing of light just brushes over it, just rushes over it, and yet you are there. Like unbelievably there. Yeah. And then you never get gypped again. The idea of, oh, I really missed something, fucking never comes up. It's just like fucking humor. Because you can never have missed anything. Yeah? The idea of getting into the moment is totally, totally flushed down because you can't be out of a moment. Yes? The whole idea of working hard to get out of self is seen to be ridiculous. You realize you've never been in self. There's been selfing, but there was no way you ever entered self. It's what you are has never changed, no matter what has been entertaining itself to be. Yeah? And it's entertaining can only last for, let's say, 90 years, 110 years, 70 years. Yeah? And it's a fucking marathon. It's huffing and puffing this thing, and then it's going to end anyway. And it'll be like nothing ever happened. Just like when you go to sleep at night. Everything, the Etch-a-Sketch gets erased. And then if you wake up and, the leather jacket's there, and happy days, the Fonz, you play the Fonz for another fucking day. But now, man, you can really enjoy it. You're available to things you weren't available. Yeah, it's amazing. Now I don't even want to I don't want to get out of here. My whole life since 6 on, I wanted to get out of here. I have no interest in getting out of here now. Yeah.
Would you say that, like the way to look at the relapsing hell and the grace that we think becomes available sometimes when we go back and relapse again, that it's just a story of becoming convinced that grace is all that I am and that I need, as opposed to any amount of.
I think it has a lot to do with being convinced.
Yeah, so it's like a positive way of becoming convinced that grace is all. So like with Wendy, I can see her as, one mind being convinced, seemingly in her, and like what I would do with somebody if I were with them in that situation, all I can do is become convinced that grace.
Yes, well, you hold the space, yeah. You're the living solution.
Yeah, so yeah, it's relaxing much with somebody that is relapsing.
Hey, she had a destiny, her seed assignment. I mean, so many people tried to help her, and I spent time with her a number of times. The parasite had her, her eyes, there was nothing behind them, or it wasn't light in a way, she just had a destiny. In my humble, unimportant opinion, I'm happy she's gone. She's free from it now. I mean, you can't. She was about 60, fucking drinking vodka all day, and how long can it take that? And she looked fucking terrible physically. I mean, she was a very beautiful woman, 6'1", and she just looked like a caricature, like a graphic novel caricature. It's not a random occurrence. It's happening all over the place. I find the only thing you can do is honor the gift, by being it, I mean, what's a better way to have a spiritual condition than to be a spiritual condition? Which is the whole idea of a daily reprieve from the alcoholism, is the maintenance of your spiritual condition. You can't tell me any maintenance would be higher than being a spiritual condition. I mean, being is such a high level of maintenance, there's no maintenance. You're being the solution. You're not having to weed anything or fucking, that's a high level. That's where the thing of the promise in page 84 or something, where the problem will not exist for you. For it to really stabilize, it's seen as the problem doesn't exist as you. Because you can have experiences being identified as self where the problem does not exist for you, but it will never stabilize. It won't become a state. That happens, but that becomes available when the problem doesn't exist as you, which is you not being up the ass of that act of being identified as a self. There's a solution. I would just like seeing people travel lighter. I mean, it would just be such a nice gift. Can you imagine most people's troubles? We're in a fucking high level of heaven here. We got cars, we got fucking shoes. You know what I mean? Tons of blue jeans, you wear anything. Live on a lagoon. Fucking, we have it easy. And yet, people taking tons of fucking sleep medication, fucking like that. It's just, Jesus, I hate to see them in Newark at night, Newark, New Jersey. They fucking have a nervous breakdown. Fuck. So I don't know, I think we should just, they used to say this thing, the brain, the mental state is still in the idea of survival when we've moved past there and we're living, It's time to fucking live. Live with a constant fear or something. Fucking be brazen with freedom. What is freedom but brazen? It's not a timid fucking expression. It's not walking around, I don't wanna bother the rain cloud over my head. No, you're fucking there, enjoying. There's no do I deserve, well, that's out the window. Do I deserve this? Or let me call up the mental accountants. Have I done enough work today to have a nice night? Can I, none of that, fucking fire all those fucking things. Yeah, if life wants to be nice to you, fucking accept it, yes? I mean, why would you want to say no to that invitation? Because you're saying yes to a fucking insane invitation. I'm not good enough. And then the worst is when something beautiful comes and you're afraid you'll lose it, and it's so much so the fear of losing it that you fuck it up now, you know? That's a weird way to go. I take my lumps, man, now fuck it. Yeah. Don't you feel, it's like a cow, you know, with a well-worn way to the trough. Isn't it time to fucking stick your head up and look around? Shit. Do it. I really have to do what everyone else does? Can I have maybe it's my seat assignment would be, hey, I can chill out a lot more and somehow make money and do this and do that, and maybe be a little illegal, who knows, certain things. But hey, you know, live a little bit like that, why not? All right, that's that, eh? I didn't answer your question. What question was it? Oh, yeah, the solution thing. Yeah, find out about the problem. The solution will take care of itself, really. See, you and I looking for the solution is part of the problem. Because we want to find the solution as the problem. Who's going to win out? This problem they'll fucking do to the solution. Look at what people have done in AA. They've made it part of the problem. So many people have been in these little rehabs, everything like that. They never even got close to being convinced. That because their parents don't want them to suffer, so they send these kids who have no fucking clue to a rehab. They fucking just act themselves through it, and they're getting loaded while they're there because they're not even close to being convinced. You know, I think it's doing us a disservice. Because then the person thinks they know AA, and they never even done the steps. But I get that out of the way of a solution. I know AA, that can't be, you know, that's insane. And it's because of a misdirected intention, maybe of being helpful, it gets fucking claimed and turned into something else, you know. I'm a firm believer, you do people a disservice keeping them from their bottoms. I really do. I mean, I needed to get my ass fucking kicked. And I really hated people who fucking enabled me deep down. I take what they were giving me, but I had no respect for them. Because I needed a big fucking foot up my ass. And get, you know what I mean? I did. The shit could just kept going on and on and on. So, yeah. All right. We're gonna go eat, so.